I'm, like many of you, kind of a bit of a mutt. I'm from India originally, schooling university here in Canada. I went to Europe for 10 years, and then I've been in the US for about 15 years. 10 years ago, I was the head of innovation at Yahoo, running their incubator. And I learned a really fundamental lesson, which is when you attempt disruptive innovation in any legacy organization or environment, the immune system attacks you, right? Because all of our organizations are built to resist change and withstand risk. And yet we have technology as a forcing function hurdling us through and acting as a pressure on all of our legacy organizations and all of our institutions. And so we've got a really fundamental problem on our hands, and you heard that from both Irwin and Galit as they talked about this. How do we navigate and absorb this pace of change? So I'll kind of just frame a little bit about what we see happening. I've had the incredible luxury after Singularity to found Singularity University, after Yahoo to found Singularity University. And for about 7 or 8 years, I've been leading all of the programs there. So for every week, I'd get up and MC, host, and kind of navigate the course for a week or 2 weeks or 10 weeks, depending on the topic. So if there's a lecture on, say, or a lab or workshop on blockchain, I've heard it like 60 times. Same with autonomous cars, same with AI. As a result, I can pretend to speak about just about anything as in the thing. Not too deep. If you ask me too detailed questions, I lose the plot pretty quickly. But the pretend side goes really well. And so that gives me a really interesting perspective on this kind of massive flow that's happening. We've also since then been looking at how do you interact and coach leaders in the world, both at the public sector level, government leaders, prime ministers, presidents, mayors, etc., but also private sector CEOs of big companies, and so on. I did a talk a few months ago at Idea City, Moses' conference, called Death to Corporations, because these are large, brittle structures that are not geared for the world that's coming, right? And so there's kind of four major things that are happening today, and I'll kind of divide this into two little sets of four. The first set of four is what's actually happening in the world, and so the first of those is we're digitizing the world very rapidly, and that's pretty obvious, right? Our memories aren't in our heads anymore, they're in our smartphones. All our relationships are now digital because of social media as opposed to analog. If you're over 35 years old, your Facebook page is way more important than how you're dressed, right? And we can tell by how everybody's dressing today that this is really the case. And we found that when you digitize something, it becomes very, very disruptive. And the best framing and analogy we found for that is photography. Some of you are old enough to remember film photography. You're operating on a scarcity model. You can only carry so much film. It costs $1 a photograph, takes a few days to get your prints back, and so on. You move to the digital environment, and three fundamentally interesting things happen. First, marginal cost goes to zero. Right? Now I can take 1,000 photographs. The cost doesn't change at all. As a result of that, the domain totally explodes. In film photography, when it's costing $1 a click, I'm very carefully clicking here or there. But today we're holding the button down on all of our devices and taking billions of times more photographs because the cost is gone. The third thing, though, is very subtle but really important from a business perspective, is you shift the problem space. So in a scarcity problem space, I may try and sell very expensive cameras. I may teach courses on photography. I may publish books on composition to help people optimize for that scarcity. But in an abundant problem space, we all have 8 copies of our photograph on 10 devices, and you can't find anything, right? More importantly, nobody can make money in the old way. Try selling books on photography and see how many you sell, right? Gone. The business model has changed. And so we found as we digitize, the fundamental underlying paradigm of how we sell or make money totally changes. And this is the reason we're seeing such disruption, because the incumbents are optimized towards this scarcity, material, physical, money-based view of the world, and the underlying paradigm is shifting. And what we noticed at Singularity, and the driving force behind it, is we have a dozen technologies that are moving at the same exponential rate that we've seen in computation. In neuroscience, where the resolution at which we can image the brain is doubling every year. Drones are doubling every 9 months in their capability. We're sequencing the human genome. We're doubling that every 5 months. And this is unprecedented. Never before in the history of mankind have we seen this many technologies move this quickly. And so this is acting as a massive forcing function, because each of them is doubling in its own, but where they intersect, that adds a whole other multiplier to the equation, right? So cryptocurrencies are just a mixture of computation and cryptography. And where you see these intersections, you see massive breakthroughs happening in a way that we've never seen. If you've seen these autonomous cars, they use a LiDAR unit at the top, light radar, to navigate. 6 years ago, that light radar cost $75,000. And today, that same unit is $40. Why? Because there's 3 or 4 technologies, and they're each doubling. The aggregate effect is orders of magnitude. And we have a really tough time getting our heads around that. And so this disruption is enormous. The third piece of this is a demonetization. So you have this kind of incredible cost drop as we take the money out of the system. Very few people can make money in the same way in music or newspapers or publishing, but now cars, taxis, hotels, all being digitized in a very different way. So we sell 90 million new cars a year around the world today. When you own a car, you use it 4% of the time, and it depreciates while you own it. It's the worst investment you could possibly make. At least with a house, it may appreciate. With a car, you use it 4% and it depreciates. That's a terrible idea. And you're basically, when you see car ads, they're trying to sell you the lifestyle, the sexiness of this gleaming curve on this piece of the car. But really, it's totally useless. And as you see this, what's happening, the younger generation doesn't care what brand the Uber is. And what's also the car companies aren't noticing is teenagers in big cities all over the world aren't getting driver's licenses. That's going to be kind of hard to sell them a car. And so we're going to see this deflationary cliff, and we've seen this before in the newspaper industry, in the music business. Revenues kind of went along like this, and then boom, you had a 6x or 10x drop in revenues within a couple of years as the whole thing digitized. And the money leaves the system. And the big challenge we're seeing today in the economy is as we're digitizing and getting more efficient, even though production is expanding, the net effect is almost zero. And today, this economic recovery of this last 10 years has been almost completely from governments printing money. There's not been underlying productivity increases in the economy. And the final piece that makes us so inexorable is the sheer democratization of these technologies. Because they're cheap, in the past, advanced technologies used to cost a lot, and only a government lab or a big corporate lab could afford to kind of play with it. But today, drones, Bitcoin, neuroscience breakthroughs are totally unbelievable. Anybody can access them. Any entrepreneur can enter a legacy environment with a beginner's mind, leverage these new technologies, and totally disrupt it. It's completely down to a mindset today. Elon Musk may be the best example. No experience in the car sector, the energy sector, or the space industry, and yet he's created market leaders in all of them. And his methodology, by the way, is really simple. He looks at a technology that's growing exponentially, aims 10 years out, where will this be in a 10-year curve? And then he aims to build a company to intercept that curve. Because it takes about 10 years to build a global organization. And then it takes off after that. And so that's his pattern. And the mindset of just kind of leveraging these new technologies and refusing to say no and just plugging ahead is really what drives success, combined with the acceleration in the technologies. Many of you are familiar with the Hyperloop, where he wants to go from LA to San Francisco in 20 minutes at about 4,000 miles an hour. A lot of people think it's impossible, but now we have prototypes being built all over the world along these lines. And I was chatting with him about this, and I said, Elon, I have a degree in physics. If you're trying to get in 20 minutes and you try and accelerate a human being from 0 to 4,000 miles an hour and then decelerate them back to 0, you're probably going to kill them. And his answer was, yes, it's an issue, right? Like this is, I'm like the expert. I'm going, you should just stop. You might kill somebody, so hold off. Most of us would just say, whoa, back off. Let's not try that, etc. And he's like, yeah, it's a problem. We have to overcome that problem, right? And so this is the attitude of all of the new generation of entrepreneurs that are just saying, I'm just going to go do it. Vitalik Buterin, right? $40 billion industry, totally will change the world. 18 years old. He ignored all the pleas of his professors to be careful about what he was doing. Boom, off he goes. And so this is the enormous forcing function, this younger generation armed with this, why not try it, plus the low cost of these technologies will disrupt everything. And in the face of that disruption, I've got kind of the final 4 observations in what's happening. The first is that we have 20 Gutenberg moments hitting us at the same time. Right? In the 15th century, the printing press changed everything. And it took about 100 years for society to absorb the full pace of change of that one invention. And in the past, we've had 1 or 2 of those happening occasionally, but today we have a full 20, because just Autonomous cars changes everything, right? Then you add in drones, and you add in Bitcoin, you add in blockchain, food technologies, AI, virtual reality, solar energy. We have never seen this before. And what we're seeing is our enormous inability to absorb all of this technology, right? Society is not set up for this. It's breaking every institution. And this is what I'm focused on a lot today, is how do you solve this breakage of our existing institution? Journalism is breaking education. You know, all our education systems are designed to take a young child, train them up through their early 20s to be ready for the existing job market. Except we don't know what a job looks like in 5 years. What are we teaching them? Right? Or religions, we have life extension coming, where we have new technologies that will break through the aging barrier. We already have mice that are living to an equivalent of 300 years old, by the way. So we've really broken through that. It just has to be commercialized, et cetera, et cetera. This is going to cause enormous problems. You know, retirement planning, unemployment benefits, health insurance, religions. You know, most religions are selling an afterlife as a business model, right? How do you sell heaven if nobody's dying? Right? This is going to be an interesting challenge. I've actually done some workshops at the Vatican where we talked about this. And so really huge challenges, which is an old thing. Both death and taxes, which used to be the only true truths, or both look like they might disappear, because you might actually get rid of taxes and have a universal basic income, which inverts the whole pyramid. Because technology is delivering so much productivity to the world, we can actually do that pretty reliably. And the experiments that we've tracked on what's called a UBI have been phenomenally successful. The challenge of getting from a taxation, labor, union, job-based environment to that is such a huge leap. We have very little confidence in our political structures to get us there. And so we're going to have to route around. What we've noticed in the work that I did when writing this book, Exponential Organizations, is if you want to do something disruptive, do not do it inside the legacy organization or the legacy institution. You'll just get into a political fight. Do it at the edge, ideally in secret, and then keep just pointing it away and spinning off new ideas. Don't tell the legacy what you're doing. Right? Apple does this very well. Their methodology is they'll form a small team that's really disruptive, put them to the edge of the organization, keep them completely secret, and they'll say to them, go disrupt another industry. So they have a portfolio of teams looking at different industries, and when they think something is ready for disruption, they enter it in and then fold it all back into the iTunes platform. And so we're going to see more and more of that methodology. And we advise a lot of big companies, but now we're going to have to start doing that with our institutions, because all of our institutions are breaking. So one thing is we've got the technology kind of hurtling along. Second, this breaks our institution. The third observation around this is our existing leaders simply don't cut the mustard on this. All of our leadership structures today about training people to operate and lead in a stable, predictable, incremental, fairly logical, linear view of the world, and the train is pulling into Black Swan Central, right? And that doesn't work at all. And the final is that today, almost all of the action and certainly most of the implementation is happening at a city level. Right? Our nation states are too complex to manage today. If you take some of the biggest cities in the world, Shanghai, Tokyo, Mexico City, Sao Paulo, those are bigger and more complex than any country was 100 years ago. Right? And democracies don't work in this world either. We invented representative democracies when information was scarce. If you're in Ottawa or Washington, D.C., you had literally no idea what was happening in California. The speed of a horse was as fast as you found out. So you had somebody travel across the country. Parliament met occasionally to give people time to cross the country and show up and say, here's what my people are thinking. But today we have an abundance of information. We know exactly what people are thinking across the country, except now there's so much information it can get misused, misinterpreted, faked, and we end up in the mess that we're in around that. And so we really have to figure out how to navigate that. And the work that I'm doing now is how do you solve this immune system problem? Because we have the new stuff arriving unrelenting. And so we have to crack that problem. We've been working on that problem for the last few years, and we've cracked it in the private sector, and now we're working on the public sector. We've run this process a few times in Medellin in Colombia. We did a process with the mayor of Miami last year, and we just finished a process with the president of Colombia and the Supreme Court to redo the justice system in Colombia. So there's an interesting challenge to work on. What we're going to do now is saying, okay, let's see if we can open source that methodology so that anybody can pick it up and run with it to address climate change and some of these structural issues that we aren't able to deal with in any of our political systems today. And so that's, I think, the work. And I think if I summarize where we're going, it's one of the massive benefits of technology is that it delivers abundance. Right? And that's, you heard the food discussion. It does do that, but we have to be careful and be thoughtful about where it's taking us. And so when we have graduates that are coming out of Singularity, we urge them, if you're using these new technologies, instrument the hell out of it so that you have a feedback loop, you have data to analyze, you can see if something's going off the rails. If we could go back 50 years ago and know really what all the coal-fired plants were doing in the world, we might have done things very differently. So be very careful about how we instrument these ideas. I think where we're at right now is we've got about a 20 or 25 year period. And if we can navigate this next 25-year period and transition the world from old structures to new, then we end up in a kind of a Star Trek abundance kind of an environment. Unfortunately, right now, we're heading into a Mad Max kind of environment, right? And that's pretty clear. So those are the two futures that we have available to us, Star Trek or Mad Max. And we're going to have to figure out, right now, we're heading kind of down the wrong direction, as you can see from our dear friends in the South. How do you tilt that the other way? And that's, I think, the work that we have to do. Thank you very much.